Hello, my name is Art Messiter, and Liz is my wife of 60 years. I've looked over the comments that I've prepared, and I realize I will be emphasizing our family experiences rather than my own very limited accomplishments. I hope that'll be okay. I was born in Brooklyn, New York in February 1930. I'm an only child, as were some of my friends also born during those Depression years. Both my parents were born in 1900, so they had lived through lots of technology changes, airplanes, television, etc. My mother lived in the New York area, graduated from Hunter College in New York City, and was a grade school teacher for a few years. My father was born in Leadville, Colorado, and the family later moved to the New York area. He worked for Consolidated Edison for many years in personnel, which would now be called human resources. When I was 6 years old, we moved to Garden City, Long Island, about 20 miles from Manhattan and midway between North and South Shores. My parents bought a small house, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, for $8,000. We understand that it now may be worth about $800,000, up by a factor of 100. We lived a couple of miles from an Army Air Force base, Mitchell Field, and what was then Roosevelt Field, from which Lindbergh took off in 1927. So there were airplanes in the sky constantly. P-38, P-39, P-40, B-25, a Ford trimotor, Grumman F-4F Wildcat, later also P-47s, P-51s, and more, in case anybody remembers those designations. The schools were very good. At that time, I understand to have been among the best in the U.S. In high school, I was able to take a semester of calculus and 2 years of physics. But I missed biology and still am largely ignorant in anything pertaining to biology, medicine, and so on. One of our English teachers was John Warriner, later well known for his book on English grammar. I also took 2 years of Latin, which taught me a lot about English, and then 3 years of French. For college, I was fortunate to receive a tuition scholarship from Grumman Aircraft, then located a few miles east from us in Bethpage. That helped cover costs at Cornell, where I enrolled in a program called Engineering Physics. Close to a major in physics, plus a major in math, plus a variety of very challenging engineering courses. Engineering programs at Cornell then were 5-year programs with a lot of elective freedom in the 5th year. I took some courses in aeronautical engineering, including one in aerodynamics from a really outstanding and inspiring teacher. Among other things, he showed us the importance of mathematics in studying aerodynamics. That led me to remain another year for a master's in aeronautical engineering. During my years at Cornell, I spent summers working at Grumman as required by my scholarship. The first 3 summers were on the factory floor, so I saw how, at least at that time, airplanes were actually made. Grumman was then building the F-6F Hellcat, another in the series of Navy fighters named after various kinds of cats. The next 3 years were in engineering and a research department. After graduation, I worked 1 more year at Grumman, again in the research department. But I didn't know the relevant research literature and decided to work for a doctorate. I was accepted at Caltech and took the train to California with enough savings for only a few months. Fortunately, I received a generous fellowship from the Hughes Aircraft Company, where I worked 1 day a week and summers for 3 years until my graduation. with a degree that said aeronautics and mathematics. It was a challenge to drive between Pasadena and Culver City during busy traffic times. After graduation, I worked at Hughes for 2 more years, then returned to Caltech as a postdoctoral fellow. Some of my financial support was from teaching a first-year graduate calculus course. Now I should talk about Liz. She was born in April 1939 in Montclair, New Jersey. After losing his wife to serious illness, Liz's father remarried. Ultimately, there were 8 more children, 2 of them younger than our oldest. A curious family. The family later moved to a farm in Coventry, Connecticut, where Liz helped take care of the chickens, as I remember, and in 1955 to Los Angeles. Liz received her nursing diploma through a 3-year program at Queen of Angels Hospital in Los Angeles. Several of her courses were taken at Immaculate Heart College in Hollywood, a small and good liberal arts college that later had to close for financial reasons, as was the case nationally for a number of other good small colleges. She and I met in Beverly Hills in January 1961. She was standing in the doorway, and I couldn't get through the doorway. We hastily, rashly made a quick decision that we were good for each other, and we were married in June of that same year. Her stepmother didn't like me and predicted that the marriage wouldn't last. But we seem to have made it through 60 years. For various reasons, we had to move 4 or 5 times in the Pasadena area during our first year, once while Liz was 8 months pregnant. Our first of 5 children was born in May 1962. At the time, we lived in South Pasadena and had to take 2 freeways to reach Queen of Angels, where she would give birth. That route passed Dodger Stadium, so we made plans for alternate routes if there were a home game at the wrong time. As it turned out, we left home at 2 a.m., and Sue was born at 7 a.m. Also, I had been a pack-a-day cigarette smoker. That night at the hospital, I smoked, drank coffee, and got sick. The net outcome was that I stopped smoking after that, even without the later knowledge about lung cancer. In August of that year, 1962, we drove across the U.S. to Ann Arbor with our 3-month-old, of course stopping at numerous motels. At one restaurant, 2 other patrons looked at our daughter, couldn't tell whether she was a boy or a girl, and placed bets on which was the case. That was fun. Among our memorable stops was at spectacular Glacier National Park, where there were far more glaciers than is true today. I started at U of M in 1962 when we arrived in Ann Arbor, in the department now called Aerospace Engineering. My work was a combination of aeronautical engineering and applied mathematics. I taught courses mostly in aerodynamics and continued doing research on various kinds of flow problems, including transonic and supersonic aerodynamics, viscous boundary layer flows, and more. The basic physics for fluid dynamics is really quite simple. Conservation of mass, Newton's second law, that force equals mass times acceleration, and an energy balance. But when applied to fluids, the equations become quite complicated. To try to summarize briefly, my work was largely to study simple geometries and limiting cases where some quantity is very large or very small. The hope is that the dominant physics is identified. The equations become far simpler, and sometimes the results can be first approximations for more complicated situations. This approach probably isn't as useful today because of vastly improved computational capacity. I was able to publish in 10 or 12 well-regarded journals, the choice depending on the subject. For my first sabbatical in 1969, I went back to Pasadena and Caltech. We had bought a tent trailer, one of our best investments ever, and on our way back to Ann Arbor, we took a long northern route and camped out for 30 days. One of our stops was in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Besides Mount Rushmore and some terribly commercialized areas, there's some beautiful country, and we enjoyed some hiking there. Later, on our last night, we were in the Upper Peninsula with our tiny portable TV. We were able to watch Neil Armstrong land on the moon. As I mentioned, we have 5 children, 2 girls and 3 boys, born roughly one every 2 years, and 12 grandchildren. Our daughter Patty and son Paul and their families live in Ann Arbor. Daughter Sue and family live an hour west of Chicago. Son Steve and family live outside Raleigh, North Carolina. Son John and family live in Denver. After the children had started school, Liz enrolled at the U of M to work toward her Bachelor of Science in Nursing. She received her degree in December 1975. Immediately afterward, we left for my next sabbatical in Zurich, Switzerland, where I was able to work with one of my former professors who had returned to Switzerland at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule. We took the 5 children, then aged 4 to 13, after we all learned some elementary German at our local Y. We rented an apartment in a building owned by the school near what was essentially a North Campus. I took a shuttle bus to reach my shared office at one of the main buildings downtown. The children went to local schools with classes, of course, in German. First few weeks were hard, but they adapted well. Excuse me. We also had the opportunity to travel extensively during weekends and the kids' vacation periods. 1 week was spent in Engelberg, a somewhat lesser-known ski resort partway between Lucerne and Interlaken. The 4 older children had ski lessons. Our youngest, John, was a bit of a concern as we watched him slide fearlessly down a hill on what seemed like a cafeteria tray, and also later on the day when he skipped school with a friend from the Netherlands. We had chosen not to rent a car, and the public transportation, of course, was excellent. We had 3 other short but memorable trips, all but train. Above Interlaken, we stayed overnight at, I believe, about 11,000 feet at a hotel close to the Jungfrau. Another favorite was the visit to Zermatt, where we took the cog railway to the Gornergrat with a great view of the Matterhorn. We also hiked in the hills near Zermatt. And on a different trip, we took a few days in Innsbruck, including a visit nearby to Neuschwanstein, the spectacular castle on which Disney's castle is based. On the way home, we went by train to Paris, where we stayed for a few days at a low-cost hotel near l'Arc de Triomphe. By low cost, I mean, for example, that in the late afternoon, there were occasional young ladies leaning against automobiles in the streets near the hotel. And then one day, the elevator in the hotel was stuck between 2 floors, with Liz and 2 of our children inside. Outside, I panicked, forgot most of the French that I ever knew, but somehow got the Paris fire department to come. After some 45 minutes, the elevator was fixed and all was well. We flew home from Paris. Back in Ann Arbor, at one point I volunteered, always dangerous, at a department meeting to try teaching a course about helicopter theory. It would be easy, I thought, since it would only involve aerodynamics. But it turned out to be a lot harder than I expected because the coupling between aerodynamics, flight dynamics, and structures is much stronger than for airplanes. One year, a student in my helicopter class, François-Xavier Bagnoux, who was from Switzerland, as a teenager was already a skilled helicopter pilot, and so could sometimes correct me from a pilot's viewpoint. After graduating, Francois rejoined his father's helicopter rescue service in Sion, Switzerland. Francois later was killed in a tragic crash while flying at night over Mali, helping to monitor the Paris-Dakar auto race. The accident and reason for flying at night were never really explained. Francois' extremely large intended inheritance was then directed primarily toward issues of healthcare and human rights. In particular, there is a Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard. A similar but small, still substantial amount went to the U of M Aerospace Engineering Department toward the construction of our then new building, the FXB building, named in memory of Francois, at the corner of Beale and Hayward on North Campus. I had another sabbatical in 1991 with 3 months in London and 1 month in Vienna, again working with people I already knew. In London, I was in the math department at University College London and gave talks at 5 or 6 other universities, including Cambridge. While I was spending my days at University College and at the Technical University in Vienna, Liz had the chance to explore those cities on her own. Liz spent most of her nursing career at Mott Children's Hospital at the U of M as a clinical nurse in pediatric cardiology. That clinic has expanded enormously over the last few decades. They first had a small business basement area with 2 exam rooms and now occupy the entire 10th floor of the new Mott Hospital. A far wider range of treatment is available now, including even an occasional heart transplant for a child. Liz had a much too heavy workload, and when she was retired, she was replaced by 2.5 people, 2 nurses and a medical assistant. She retired in 1998 to help our daughter Patty with her newborn premature twin boys, who are now 22 years old, both of whom graduated in 2021 from the U of M. During retirement, Liz has been active with the U of M Faculty Women's Club, serving on various committees, and then a 1-year term as president of the club. She participated in a quilting group and a bridge group. She volunteered at Ronald McDonald House for many years and also was a member of the advisory committee for the University of Michigan Musical Society. Here at Glacier, she's been chair of the Meadows Dining Committee and currently is a board member of the Glacier Hills Foundation. She volunteers at the Glacier Library and serves as an apartment representative on the Meadows Executive Committee. I also retired in 1998 and feel very lucky to have found some volunteer work that I was comfortable with. I was part of a tax assistance program for low-income seniors for about 17 years. I'm by no means a tax expert, but learned enough to do Michigan heating and housing credits and some elementary Michigan and U.S. tax returns. I also was, for about 13 years, part of a program designed to help Medicare recipients with information about health insurance issues. For example, it was possible to help people choose prescription drug plans using the Medicare website. This program was Michigan's version of federally mandated programs called state health insurance assistance programs, sadly not adequately funded. During the year when I retired, we moved after 36 years at our first home to a smaller condo in Stonebridge, where we stayed for another 19 years. After 2 years on the waiting list for Glacier, we moved here in March 2017. We want to thank everyone for the friendly welcome we were given when we moved to Glacier. We're extremely happy to have found so many new and wonderful friends and want to thank everyone for your generous friendship. Thank you.